Hello my dear friends, how have you been? I hope I find you all in good health. I'm Ari Thurger and today I'm going to talk about heathen versus pagan. Speaking about these two terms to designate a variety of peoples, not only when in historical terms we speak about pre-Christian and non-Abrahamic cultures, but also when we speak about modern day individuals, groups, organizations, and obviously religious manifestations that also present these same characteristics. A display of religious and spiritual pre-Christian and non-Abrahamic beliefs, or an attempt to reconstruct pre-Christian non-Abrahamic systems of belief. I'm actually doing this video because, this channel is about to reach its fourth year of existence. Congratulations are in order, I guess. So since this channel is mostly about Scandinavian studies as well as other pagan studies, inevitably, for a better understanding of context, historical context, I often use the term pagan and heathen to designate various pre-Christian, non-Abrahamic belief systems throughout Europe mostly. As it is obvious, these two terms are also often used nowadays by a variety of academics and mostly by archaeologists, colleagues of mine, for the exact same purpose. So, one of the most asked questions in this channel in the past 4 years was, "Hey Arith, how are you?" Now, the second most asked question is, why do I call or keep calling pagans the people from the past when the word pagan was invented or used by Christians to denigrate and display disapproval and hostility towards non-Christian peoples. And as such, if I continue to call them pagans, I'm being very, very disrespectful towards these people. And the same sort of question appears sometimes in relation to the term heathen as well, which is usually not only to designate pre-Christian Northern European peoples, but also Western European ones. Of course, in great part in relation to Northwestern pre-Christian Europeans. So, I've decided to make this video so next time someone says this or asks me these sort of questions, I'll just have to send them the link to this video and be done with it. I actually find it quite annoying, this sort of attitude our societies have adopted in the past 10 years or so. Many people are always ready and eager to point fingers and express what's wrong, but offer no real solution. All those who have asked me this question, I have given them ample opportunities to offer a term to replace the term pagan and the term heathen. One that doesn't have the historical derogatory understanding, and it's still able to designate pre-Christian and non-Abrahamic peoples. And to this day, no one so far was able to give me an alternative. So by all means, if you have one alternative, let me know in the comments below. But watch the video till the end. This is actually pretty annoying, this attitude of being ready to point out a problem, but no actual attempt or effort whatsoever to solve that problem. It's easy to say what's wrong, but less so to actually do the effort to solve a problem. This is a general impulse our societies have nowadays, not really being interested in solving problems and just manifest and show disapproval towards a problem or a person, and therefore creating more problems to add to the already existing problems. So let us all think a little bit about that, trying to actually solve problems. Because it's not just pointing a problem, because that's easy, everyone can do that. No one is the righteous savior of humanity for demonstrating a problem, obviously. So we all have to address those problems and to do the effort to solve them. Anyway, moving on. Just before we start this video, one last thing, one quick thing. I would very much like to show you this beautiful stone I bought from Sigurd Gretarsson. Isn't it beautiful? I really like this one, so I bought it. So actually, Sigurd is such a nice person that he actually sent me another one, this tiny little fellow, also very beautiful. So just in case you want anything from this man, and by the way, a great musician, I'll leave down below in the description of this video his Instagram and also his YouTube channel, so you can check his musical performances. It's not just music and it's not just rocks, but a lot of other things. I'm quite sure many of you will enjoy it. But please do ask him for these, even if it's just for the fun of watching him spending his days at the beach collecting rocks. Now, with no more delay, let's start our today's video, please. Perhaps we ought to understand first the essence of the various non-Abrahamic and pre-Christian European belief systems before jumping into the meaning of the terms pagan and heathen. It has been suggested before an alternative term to pagan and heathen, which is animist, from animism, which isn't totally wrong, but it also isn't right and creates more confusion than actually giving a solution, or a good solution. Trying to greatly simplify this, paganism is about a world-accepting view. What I mean with this is that it's not the actual beliefs within a religion that make it pagan or non-pagan, but in fact it's about the perception of the world and actively interact with the world according to that same perception. Being a pre-Christian religion isn't enough to call it pagan, because, for instance, as an example, Zoroastrianism is pre-Christian, it's even pre-Judaism, and as you know it, also non-Abrahamic. But it isn't pagan at all, and it displayed a strong inclination to become or to be a fully monotheistic religion in the past, and eventually, of course, becoming quite early an actual monotheistic religion. Now, Hinduism, is it pagan? Most people would agree so, because it's pre-Christian, non-Abrahamic, it shows strong Indo-European influences, it shows certain animistic understandings or conceptions, it has many gods, and so on and so forth. However, personally, I do not agree that Hinduism is a paganism or should be called a paganism, precisely because of its worldviews. Not to mention that since it is a religion, there are specific canons, there is a specific approach, rules and laws to be followed, specific expressions of devotion and faith towards a variety of divinities, so it has limitations. Just because a specific faith has a lot of gods, that doesn't automatically make it pagan. Paganism is a syncretism of several belief systems in which the approach towards the, let's say, supernatural is a lot more practical, more active, and fewer displays of devotion towards divinities, and a lot more focus on the systematic exercise of interacting directly with the supernatural through practical ritual activities. We can divide religions and faith, spirituality, spiritual and religious philosophies into two main groups, mainly, which are world-accepting views and world-denying views. Every belief system in which the religious approach, ceremony, ritual, cultic practice, devotion, and any other display of that same belief system is towards achieving spirituality or something else out of this world, that is a world-denying view. And that includes Hinduism, Buddhism, Abrahamic faiths, various Abrahamic faiths, anything whose aim is to reach something out of this world and a complete denial of this world. A religious or spiritual life to reach heaven, to reach the salvation of the soul, to live among the gods in their divine realm, to achieve the quality of divinity, godhood, to reach nirvana. All of this is a world-denying view. The aim isn't living in this world. It isn't taking the pleasures of this world, but in fact, the aim is to achieve something else out of this world. The abandonment of the material, the completely abandonment of the physical world, overcoming and denying attachment to the senses and to the emotions and to the things that hold us to this world, the transgression of the physical. This is, very basically, obviously, what makes a religion or spirituality a world-denying view. A world-accepting view is the opposite, of course. It is precisely an understanding of this world that makes the individual want to interact with it, live in it, embrace the pleasures of life, be immersed in the life of this world. And the afterlife or the other world or anything perceived to exist after death isn't actually somewhere else out of this world, but it is already in this world. And these are usually pagan beliefs, the pagan mentalities, whose perceptions of life are still quite animistic, and an understanding that the spiritual or the supernatural reality is already inserted in this world. It is in this world, and the world of humanity inserted in it. But we have a problem here, because even world-denying religions contain some animistic understandings still, although those are greatly repressed and often neglected and purposely forgotten. So, it isn't really about the belief within a religion or a spirituality, because every religion and every spirituality, every display of faith and devotion towards something or action towards the supernatural is inevitably a syncretism of beliefs. So, it may contain many ideas that often contradict themselves. Again, it's all about a world view and what we want to achieve. Is it a life out of this world we want to achieve, or is it a life in it? Are we spending our days trying to achieve something after death or achieving a transgression of the self so we can enjoy existence elsewhere, or are we already living and interacting with the supernatural every time we interact with the natural world, daily? Paganism is a lot more attached to animistic beliefs, which helps it to be a world-accepting view. But paganism isn't fully animism, and that's what must be addressed as well. Animism isn't a religion, animism isn't a spirituality, animism is a world view. Animism is the core of a world-accepting view. The human person interacts with a world populated with persons. The great majority are non-human persons. It's not just about animals, trees, rocks, natural phenomenon, but also the interaction with a variety of entities. And the human being is not only inserted within the spiritual already, but it is also immersed in it, and there is no clear separation between the world of the spirits and the world of the living, because everything is already in it together. And animism deals a lot more with the practical, active approach towards a variety of entities which contain a consciousness, a spirit, are able to take action and produce activity and display behavior, and the human person tries to maintain a beneficial symbiotic relationship with everything, both to avoid any negative consequence or action, but also to obtain a benefit and maintain a healthy balance to avoid catastrophe. Therefore, animism is a worldview, and from animism sprouts a variety of human behaviors according to that view, in order to interact with the world. From animism comes shamanism, for instance, as an example. Shamanism isn't a religion, and shamanism isn't a spirituality either. Shamanism is a perception towards a worldview, and with that perception, the individual and the society the individual lives in take specific actions according to the worldview the individual and its society has. There's no shamanism without animism, but shamanism can also be influenced by perceptions within other religions due to cultural syncretism. Shamanism is a specific practical activity towards an animistic perception of the world. The same thing goes for fetishism. Fetishism isn't a spirituality. It is a perception as well, a perception towards an animistic worldview. Therefore, a perception that is world accepting. Fetishism is an action towards a perception coming from a worldview, right? So, this is when we reach paganism in its essence. Paganism is the ability to maintain a world-accepting view, still quite animistic, but inserted within the society, and with a series of practical activities, display of ceremony and ritualistic action, cultic action, and a structured belief system, always evolving, which is open to cultural syncretism, all in the name of maintaining an active interaction with the supernatural in our daily lives. It's not just about the perceptions of divinity. It's not only about a spiritual aim, but as a whole, paganism, it is about the continuation of the development of human interaction towards the spiritual, constantly, daily, through a series of practical activities, both in and out of the domestic domains, the domestic environment. The world is populated with various entities, and the pagan person maintains or tries to maintain that interaction with the various entities and forces. Paganism is the ability to maintain alive more archaic perceptions and world-accepting views. In other words, maintaining alive the old ways, still being able to absorb several beliefs, but maintaining its animistic essence. Paganism is the development of the creativity of the human mind. Paganism is a never-ending, never-stopping development. It's the evolution of thought without breaking a connection with the spiritual. In fact, the development of belief due to cultural syncretism, this evolution, is precise to find more ways and better ways to strengthen the human interaction towards or with the spiritual world, which is all around us. Which is why we call this paganism, because pagans were those that lived in the countryside, in the rural areas, the remote areas away from the great urban centers, and therefore religious influences weren't so drastic and forced, nor were they rapidly implemented. The people living within centers of political and economic power ended up obviously being highly influenced and accepting the official religions of the state or the elite or any other controlling organism, precisely to construct a better social, political, and economic control in favor of the benefit of the unit, which is a composition of communities. On the other hand, those living far from the centers of power, living in the countryside, remote areas, rural areas, took longer to absorb the several religious influences and developments of larger communities, larger settlements in the cities mainly, but would eventually absorb them one way or another. But slowly, progressively, being able to still maintain a contact with the more archaic belief systems, and therefore creating a rich system of beliefs, adopting several new ideas, and applying them to their world perception, to their world accepting views, and maintaining the active interaction with the natural world and the spiritual. Now, with this being said, and understanding the essence of a pagan perception or the pagan mind, we must understand the term pagan quite literally, speaking of its origins and its literal meaning. Was it solely a derogatory term used by the Christians to designate non-Christian peoples? Let's see. My previous explanation concerning paganism is precisely because the term pagan wasn't an idea originating from Christian perceptions towards non-Christians. They might have used the term later on, but it wasn't originally a derogatory term. My previous explanation towards paganism fits into the historical and obviously the archaeological evidences precisely of those living in remote areas, apart from the great urban centers, from the moment humanity starts to be a lot more sedentary. And there are the first vestiges of settlement and the development of urban planning, showing us a clear division between an urbanized space with clear social structures, hierarchization of society, and the social divisions of the community, quite different from those left outside in remote areas with different social, economic, religious, and even political ideas. Now, as you well know it, the people who were labeled as pagans in the past, these were a variety of different cultures, following an exceedingly diverse multitude of religious conceptions, rituals, and belief systems. One of the biggest problems we face in relation to the knowledge we have of these people, these pagans, is that much of what was recorded concerning the so-called pagans is largely based on what the Christian clergy wrote. Of course, concerning Romans and Greeks and other classical civilizations, we know a little bit more of the pagan past before Christianity. But for instance, in relation to continental Germanic peoples and also Scandinavians, we know little about them before their conversion to Christianity, as most written sources in relation to these people were composed by Christians. Continental Germanic peoples were introduced to Christianity already in the 4th century. Denmark was aware of Christianity and indeed already had contact in their own lands with Christian missionaries since at least the 6th century. And up north in Scandinavia, Christianity was known already by this time as well. And since the late 8th century, many Scandinavians had already adopted Christianity. And by the 10th century, King Haakon I of Norway was already forcing everyone to Christianity. And this also goes to other peoples across the globe, obviously. Southern Americans, North American natives, and African ones. We know little about them before the colonial period, and their cultures have been greatly shaped by the prejudices and agendas of those attempting to impose a new religion upon them. Many written sources were written decades and even centuries after pagan cultures had already been Christianized. So it's pretty difficult to understand what these people were really up to. We cannot take every word at face value when we study the written sources. However, we do have archaeology, and like I usually say, we archaeologists are history's detectives. It's true. But of course, we are dealing with material cultures and interpretations of the contexts. Our understanding of pre-Christian religions from the archaeological point of view in the archaeological contexts relies exclusively on trying to identify and interpret ritual activity from the material culture we find. No one is making miracles, so we do have to take this into account. The fact that written sources were not written by pagans, except perhaps the older ones from classical civilizations. But even so, Those are on the point of view of the people who were only in contact with their own society, from their own point of view, from their own social surroundings and understandings, and clearly show great difficulty and even no attempt at all to understand other civilizations, and usually what they describe of others they came in contact with or heard saying is always in a very pejorative sense, trying to diminish others with the objective of showing their superiority over others. And then we have the field of human social sciences, such as archaeology, anthropology, and such, and the interpretation of what we have at hand, what can be found, which constitutes a small percentage because much has been lost already with time. So it's open to interpretation. But we can come to pretty good conclusions and interpretations actually, and way better than what the written sources tell us. In fact, the written sources, as I've said plenty of times on several videos, were much more on the point of view of the persecutors rather than the persecuted. So, whenever an archaeologist, such as myself, comes up with evidences and interpretations that completely go against the written sources, people get absolutely mad. And I understand why. Because for too long, we have taken each word at face value as if it were the spitting image of the truth that had been written in there, when clearly it isn't at all. And we must interiorize that much has indeed been lost to us forever. The Stone Age alone constitutes 99% of human history, and truth be told, we know close to nothing about that period if we compare it with what we know about the last 8,000 years of human history. So here's an advice to all of you. When you see anyone with a lot of certainties in relation to anything, always doubt those people. Now then, the term pagan, as you know, comes from pre-Christian Latin, the definition of those living in the countryside. Pagan comes from paganos, the villager or peasant, the person living outside the urban centers or outside the great centers of power, the person living in the remote areas tied to the land, the person living literally in the countryside, the pagose, which is rustic or precisely the countryside. This is the earliest definition of pagan, not in the derogatory sense yet, but simply designating those living outside. And I'm sure I don't need to repeat what I said previously in relation to what this implies in relation to religion and ritual and systems of belief by the part of those living outside, away from the political and religious centers. So, the pagose is literally the area outside the city. It is the pars sinistra, the left side, the area considered to be profane, the world of the Teutonian deities, the world of magic, sorcery, chaos, the world of the dead or the ancestors, and the spirits and forces of the world, whilst the inside of the city was considered sacred place, the pars destra, the right side, where the temples reside, the cult of the official pantheon, the place of order and moral. I'm still talking about in a classical Roman sense, from which the term pagan comes from, paganos. And if you want to understand a little bit more about this, I urge you to watch my video concerning the left-hand path, whose concept has its origins in ancient Roman urban planning. As you can see, the term pagan is the best one we are able to apply when speaking about pre-Christian and non-Abrahamic peoples and their belief systems, but also speaking about those who kept older forms of several belief systems, those whose religious and spiritual beliefs took longer to be shaped and reshaped by new religious conceptions, always sprouting and developing in the great urban centers, precisely to first reach the elite and those whose power gives them the ability to spread more quickly each new political and religious order and bring it more quickly unto their subjects. First, there is the creation of a religious authority, the official religion, and then spreading that religion to better control the subjects and bring them into the same official religion of the authority. So pagans kept older forms of belief precisely because it took longer for any religion to reach them and indeed actively influence their daily lives. However, from the 5th century onwards of the Common Era, of course, Christian authors began to reframe the idea behind the term paganos, giving it an overly religious meaning, describing the pagani, plural of paganos, as rural idol worshippers. Still not quite in the derogatory sense yet, but precisely demonstrating what I've said so far. The pagans being those living in remote areas outside the centers of power, taking longer to accept or even interiorize the new religions, in this case, Christianity in Rome. And as such, they were still idol worshippers, which is actually a very Christian idea or perception of the pagans, towards the pagans, not necessarily in the negative sense, but in the belief that pagans worshipped idols because Christians lacked the real understanding of the belief systems of those that did not share the same religious ideas as early Christians did. The sense of idol worshippers in here is still very much the idea that pagans kept older gods and older forms of belief, such as the use of fetishes and talismans or figurines and other objects of power to contain entities within with whom pagans interacted with or to create a beneficial connection with the entities of the world, a symbiotic relationship to avoid catastrophe, but also to receive blessings and even supernatural powers as well, and for divination purposes, healing, cursing, a whole animistic approach still. Now, the problem with the connotations behind the term pagan actually begins with the English language. Much later, pagan was often translated as peasant in the English language, but not solely as the person living in the countryside, but specifically in the sense of being ignorant, a simpleton. The religious connotations behind the term pagan completely disappeared with and in the English language, and in turn the term pagan signified a derogatory sense of an ignorant rural dweller. So now the use of the term pagan gave Christians a rhetorical advantage, reinforcing that the pagani were country folk who cling longest to idolatrous non-Christian practices, in contrast with the Christianized urban populations of the civilized world. Christianity seen as a religious sophistication, while paganism was, by contrast, simplicity. And of course, we also have to take in mind that just because the people of the countryside of the remote areas kept older forms of beliefs, this doesn't mean they were resisting new religions. On the contrary, one of the reasons why Christianity was so successful among pagans, any pagans, before having really been forced upon the people, was precisely because pagans were always seeking new ideas and beliefs to add to their own beliefs, and adding yet another deity to their already existing pantheon was just beneficial. So Christ was added as yet another god among pagans, and there was the adoption of many Christian beliefs and conceptions. This is due to the still strong animistic conceptions of the pagans, because they were used to have this sort of ritualistic contact with a wonderful variety of different entities of the world. So why not add yet another god and other conceptions if their reality had already been like that for thousands of years? Of course, things got a whole other outcome when certain religions started indeed to be forced upon the people. Now that's another matter. But in the early centuries of Christianity, up until the 10th century at least, among pagans, the people of the rural areas, it wasn't that hard to have pagans accepting Christianity. The great witch trials were not during early Christianity and Catholicism. A lot of people started to be condemned and put to death and burned at the stake progressively from the late 15th century onwards, reaching its peak between the 16th and the 17th centuries, precisely with the Reformation. Protestants against the Catholic Church. And much of the witches that were burned were either Protestants or Catholic people caught in between these religious wars and fanaticism. Actual pagans by this period were very, very few and already very much Christianized, keeping certain folk traditions, of course, obviously, but already reshaped by Christianity itself, greatly reshaped by Christianity, which is why we see a great number of folk traditions making a mixture between old gods, Judeo-Christian demons, and Christian religious figures. The resistance to Christianity was not from the part of the so-called pagans, that is, those living in the countryside, in the remote areas. The initial resistance to Christianity was held by organized groups within the cities, precisely where religions take form, and when the authority makes it official, one religion or the other, that's when that authority will spread it to its subjects. So, in a few words, the basic idea in here is that pagans, or the people in the countryside, in the remote areas, just had to wait for the outcome from the conflicts within the urban centers. Let them sort out their differences and eventually come up with some idea, and eventually they come to us with their new ideas. It's precisely with these conflicts and resistance within urban centers, within the cities, throughout the Roman Empire first, that the term pagan also gains other connotations. In the 2nd and the 3rd centuries, a common meaning of, or for paganos, as a noun and as an adjective, was civilian, in the sense of non-militant. This possibly derived from the fact that early Christians referred to themselves as enrolled soldiers of the Christian church, but they were not actually soldiers. And so non-Christians were described as pagani, those who were civilians and therefore not soldiers of Christ. But this definition by the 4th century became redundant, though. But as you can see here, there was an important and progressively development of the meaning of pagan within the Roman Empire. The term pagan, paganos, pagani, plural, was originally in reference to those living in the countryside, outside the city, in the rural areas, keeping older forms of belief and faith. That's it. With the advent of Christianity and early Christianity seen still within the Roman Empire as a faith from outside the Roman Empire, the term pagan changed and was used to designate the people of place, be that the countryside, the village, the town, or city, who preserved their local customs, which in this sense, pagani, the pagani were not yet the rural worshippers of idols, but instead they were the people defined by the religions of their local communities, as being the opposite of the people coming from elsewhere outside the Roman Empire. In other words, the Christians, seen as outsiders precisely. Then, as Christianity progressively gains power within the cities and within the Roman Empire, pagans are seen as civilians for a time, in opposition to the idea of the soldiers of Christ. And then they become worshippers of idols, and finally pagans are designated as the ignorant peasants who kept beliefs that are the opposite of the sophistication of the Christian faith. Now, All of these changes of the term pagan, paganos, within the Roman Empire, obviously, up until the 4th and the early 5th century. From this moment onwards, Christianity gains a lot more ground and spreads even more in the old provinces of the empire and out of the empire as well. When the people of ancient Britannia, the British Isles, finally interiorized Christianity, mostly from the early Middle Ages onwards, the term paganos and the pagani already comes as the designation of the ignorant, godless peasants. The English language takes the term pagan like that, and not the original meanings of the term and other developments. No, but let's say they got the final product, the final meaning of it. So this is why the term pagan is perfectly safe to still use nowadays, because its original meaning was quite different. And even in the early conflicts between the Roman pagans and Christians, the term pagan still served to designate those who preserved local customs. Now, the same thing cannot be said for the term heathen. Unlike the term pagan, the term heathen only appears with Christianity already as a derogatory term, a very negative term. While the term pagan has a clear development, slow development, and takes many centuries until it finally becomes a derogatory pejorative term, the term heathen already starts as a derogatory term, quite negative in the religious sense as well. There's no way around it. So it's actually safer for modern neo-pagans to call themselves pagan rather than heathens. But the term heathen nowadays is usually used by those of Northern Europe, from Northern Continental Europe, Scandinavia, and Northwestern Europe, because it appears first in their languages to designate pagans, but with a very negative connotation from the beginning. The term pagan has a clear development of its meaning from a perfectly reasonable and positive meaning until it reaches eventually a negative connotation. But heathen, the term heathen, on the other hand, already appears as a Christian negative term to designate the non-Christian Germanic peoples. Let's see. The term heathen is often used as another form to address pagans, but usually to describe specific pagans of Germanic context in academic studies. I have used it in this channel several times, and even if you are new to this channel and only saw like 5 of my videos, you have probably already heard me saying the term heathen 100 times. Heathen is used nowadays in academic studies simply as an aggregate designation for the peoples once adhering to the pre-Christian and non-Abrahamic faiths throughout Western and Northern Europe from the Iron Age up until the Middle Ages, in academic studies, right? This term, heathen, seems to have actually been quite popular between the 9th and the 12th centuries of the Common Era to designate specific Germanic peoples. The term, in the recent decades of our own time, gained quite the popularization within neo-pagan and reconstructionist circles. It has also been, sadly and unfortunately, appropriated by many political and extreme nationalist movements in order to promote ideas of very, very dubious and downright wrong cultural and political homogeneity and xenophobia. The term heathen was not used prior to Christianity's arrival, especially not in any matter of spiritual and religious context, historically speaking, and was mostly used as a slur, used to describe the uncivilized, Gentile, and wild population still dwelling in the most rural moorlands, in those places yet to have been reached by the missionaries, Christian missionaries. And these areas were often covered by great swaths of heather, also called hate, in Old Norse, which is low-growing, flowering perennial shrub, and as such those inhabiting these areas came to be known as heathens, or the dwellers of or among the heath. But let's develop this a little bit more, shall we? In the early church literature, there was another important term used as a synonym for pagan, which was the term Heathen, which referred to those instructed in Greek culture and ideas, and consequently also those who worshipped or still worshipped the Greek divinities, the Hellenic divinities. In other words, the Heathens were those who worshipped Greek gods, were part of the Greek culture, spoke Greek, and had Greek ancestry from their father's side, and were also considered Greek citizens. All of these. Therefore, outsiders of the Christian faith, but a specific cultural group of the Mediterranean in conflict with Roman Empire. This term by the 4th century quickly became a slur to designate the Gentile, uncivilized pagans outside the Christian Roman world, in direct conflict with the Christian Roman world. Now, when it came to spreading the word of the Bible among the Germanic tribes during the 4th century, the missionary bishop Ulfilas translated Heilnes, which in the Christian literature was the equivalent to the Latin gentilis, Gentile. So he translated into Gothic, as this term I will put on the screen because as it so happens I wasn't specifically there in the places where they spoke Gothic during that period, so I don't know how to pronounce this. But this term is a direct translation from Heilnes, and this term is heathen, cognate to Old Norse Heathen, Old Frisian Heathen, Old High German Heathen, and Old English Heathen. So this is where the term heathen comes from, directly from a synonym for pagan, for Gentile, designating a Gentile and those outside the Christian religious world, in the wild places yet to be Christianized, and therefore uncivilized, unsophisticated. There is no other original meaning for heathen as the one we have seen in pagan, or the Latin paganos. Heathen already starts as a slur. The Germanic peoples by no means called themselves heathens. They did not call themselves Germanic either. Heathen originates from the Gothic language to designate the uncivilized, ignorant, Gentile, wild Germanic peoples yet to be Christianized and baptized, obviously. Of course, I must point out that the Latin gentilis, or Gentile, can also be found in early Christian and medieval texts, although today it is used almost exclusively to mean a non-Jew, a non-Jewish person. In the pagan past, Gentile was also used in a Christian context to denote those who were not baptized, therefore not part of Christendom yet. Gentilis, Heilnes, and heathen mean the exact same thing, and this brings a problem in relation to an Old Norse goddess named Heather. Not only the name of a goddess, but also the term, or the name or the label given to specific women who performed the semi-shamanic art of divination called seidr. But not specifically women from within the Old Norse society, within the boundary of Old Norse society, but soothsayers, prophetesses, seeresses from outside the Old Norse society, from Sapmi, and quite possibly from Finland as well. Native peoples, mostly indeed Sami people, with whom Old Norse people had a closer contact with. And these women performers of Seidr were labeled Heather, precisely because of the connotations of being from outside. Heather in Old Norse literature occurs both as a category of sorceresses in its own right, specific women from a different ethnic group, and quite possibly a type of Seidr performance different from the Seidr performance usually performed by Old Norse women within the Old Norse society. So the term Seidr here isn't used to describe a specific Old Norse semi-shamanic performance for divination purposes, but indeed also it served to describe other similar semi-shamanic performances for the exact same purpose. And the term Heidr also occurs as a personal name, specifically for the Volur, the seeresses or prophetesses. But Heidr used specifically to demonstrate that these women were not from Old Norse culture, but from outside the borders, beyond the borders. And this outside idea is very important. The etymology of Heidr is interesting because it has connotations to of enclosed, uninhabited, high and treeless land, and it is related to the modern English heath and heathen from Old Norse heathen, precisely as I said before, the pagans, those living in the uninhabited wild places, uncivilized, untouched by Christianity, the place of the Gentiles. So as a term, Heidr would thus mean approximately one who belongs to the old settlements of the land within the old boundaries, beyond the old boundaries. This idea of outside the Christian world, in the old places that have not yet been Christianized. In Old Norse context, it means precisely outside the Old Norse boundaries that had already been Christianized, and that was the place of the Sami people, up north, the native peoples up north from Sápmi. But for more information on Heidr, both the goddess and the women, please check out this video I've done about Gulveig, and you will find plenty of useful information, I think, I hope, concerning this idea of heathen and Heidr. So these are the problems we face in relation to the term heathen. Heathen, unlike the term pagan, already originates in Christian context and not before, as a highly derogatory term, and not in relation to any specific religious or spiritual context we have nowadays. There's no heathen before Christianity, only after, which means the name used for the goddess Heidr, as well as the name to designate women, performance of Seidr, from outside Old Norse Christian cultural background, is already Christian context, which creates several problems. Still, from the name Heidr, we understand the context and meaning behind it, and the essence of it. And this doesn't take away the importance of this goddess. It only indicates that beyond a doubt, she wasn't originally called Heidr at all, but the meaning remains the same, as an outsider connected to the semi-shamanic art of divination, which means this Heidr was probably a goddess from Sami cultural background or with Sami origins, and some Old Norse people would be aware of her precisely at the borderlands due to the cultural syncretism and proximity. And just like the women labeled Heidr, these were specifically the Volur, the wandering seeresses and soothsayers and prophetesses from the Sami, the Heidr. But more on that on the video I've previously recommended you to watch. I promise you that one contains loads of, I think, useful information concerning this and other aspects. So, it would be a lot safer for modern neo-pagans to just call themselves as pagans, because originally it did not have the derogatory connotation. It progressively gained with Christianity, with the advent of Christianity. A lot safer than using heathen, actually, which is a term which originated already with negative connotations and nothing more than negative connotations, and already in a Christian context. Although nowadays, of course, maybe we can change the meaning to designate other sort of pagans from Northern and Northwestern Europe. But please, when you call yourself a heathen, you really do need to know the cultural background of the term. Because I see many people say, oh, no, I'm a heathen, not a pagan. as if that made them better than anyone else, when in fact it is precisely the term pagan that originally was the right term to call pre-Christian non-Abrahamic peoples who kept older forms of belief systems throughout Europe. You can call yourself whatever you want, obviously, but you do need to understand the meaning behind the term you choose to call yourself. Alright, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, thank you for today. Or, tack för idag.